And we're live. Hey, everybody. How are you doing? Great to have you with us tonight. I am Lulu Freistadt, and I am the Executive Director of Smart Elections. And we have a really interesting forum for you this evening. This is our bi-weekly Election Protection Forum. And my co-host, Benny Smith, is going to be here with us. He texted me that he was caught in very bad traffic. So I'm thinking that he'll probably come up at some point and we will get him on as soon as possible. So I'll just give you a little bit of context about the forum and what we're doing here, and then we'll bring our guest on this evening. We've got a really interesting guest for you, as we always do. So Smart Elections is a fairly new, nonpartisan, nonprofit project, and we are celebrating pretty much our second anniversary. We started in April of 2019. I'm an election security journalist, and one of the main reasons that I started Smart Elections is because of this forum and because of people like you who are watching and because of people like our guest. I was doing investigations, much as she's been doing, for I would say about 10 years. I started my first documentary, it came out in 2008. And I really relatively quickly focused on election security as one of the main issues with our elections. And what I began to find was that no matter how many views I got, no matter how many people were interested in paying attention, at one point I had about 4 million views on the investigations that I had done, I really didn't see things changing. I didn't really feel that people understood the issue in a way that was active. They understood that there might be a problem with the election results. They might be curious, they might be worried, they might be anxious, but they didn't really understand what they could do. And what Smart Elections is about really educating the public. What can we do to make sure that our elections are secure, accurate, accessible, and that they're as inclusive as possible. But we especially focus on security because I'm an election security journalist, so that's our area of expertise. Benny Smith, my co-host, is somebody who is an election official, but also has done a good deal of research on election security and is also a software programmer and developer. So our guest tonight is Allison Green. She's a writer and researcher, and she did some really interesting research on Kentucky and whether or not the results there were accurate. She raised some interesting questions. And so I'm really excited to bring her onto the forum, and we're going to talk about what she did, why she did it, and what our thoughts are and what we could do going forward with the research, because it's always okay to ask questions. That's one thing that we know about the United States is we're a democracy. It's not okay to riot. It's not okay to have an insurrection, but it's okay to ask questions. In fact, it's encouraged to ask questions. And that's what our guest did. She asked a lot of questions. So I'm really pleased to introduce her. This is Allison Green, a correspondent with DC Reports. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Super. And we're just going to let people know how they can get in touch with you. And I think it's DC Report singular. DCReport.org. Okay, yes. So that is the website that her articles are published on. And if you want to follow her on Twitter, which many people do, I will say, then that's her tag there at Grassroots Speak. And so I know that you had this thread on Twitter, and I think I have the actual image that you sent me of the amount of traffic that it got. It was just like a huge amount of traffic. And you told me it was 8 million impressions and I think 1.7 million active engagements. So you got a lot of traction on this thread. You asked some questions about Kentucky, whether or not Mitch McConnell's results were too good to be true. And so my first question to you is, what brought you to that? Why did you, what questions did you have? Why were you looking at that information?
Thank you, because I really would love to get that out there. I mean, I'm so appreciative, and I think that it's really a testimony to how many people have the same concerns that I was raising, and I just hit at a moment where I think everybody was like, you know what, I was seeing something similar, and we all kind of came together through it. So I really appreciate that, and I think that it's great that it opened up a forum for these questions. I did not say I'm going to look into Kentucky and I'm going to look into Mitch McConnell. You know, to me, I actually was prepared. Like many of the country, I was looking at the presidential election. I was really, really focused on that. But I was also concerned about Senate, all of that. And what happened was on election night, I kind of had to turn everything off for a little bit and just walk away for my own sanity, I would say. And when I came back, it was still kind of early on, and I was just hearing boom, 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 all of these Republican Senate races that I thought were going to be close, not even close. They were just falling in like dominoes to Republican wins. The first one, for example, being Lindsey Graham, I just didn't expect that. And Mitch McConnell, I would say it was not necessarily a surprise to me that he would win in Kentucky. It was a surprise by how much he won in Kentucky and how quickly he won. It was called very early on. So I started delving into what initially I started with Lindsey Graham's race in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison. I looked at a couple of others, but I quickly kept coming back to the Senate race in Kentucky and saying something just feels off.
I understand that. And let me just see if I can pull up. I had a, yeah, here we go. This is the difference between what McConnell was polling and what he actually wound up winning by. And I think these are the types of things that we tend to look at to say, you know, do we have a concern here? Or, you know, is this just something, maybe it wasn't our favorite candidate, but there was no problem with the race. So let's see if that's showing up. Yeah, so we have that on screen now. And this is one thing I do a fair amount. So if I'm curious about, you know, whether or not a race seems plausible, I'll go to realclearpolitics.com, and they have a thing there you can put in the search. You can search for polls on almost any candidate, almost any race. You can see where it says find any poll, tri-state or candidate. So I pulled up the Kentucky Senate race, and you can see here it is pretty big of a gap. So you're going to see the latest polls that they show starting in July. They had a Quinnipiac poll, and McConnell, you'll see over here on the edge, McConnell and up by 5. Then they had another Quinnipiac that was in September. He was up by 12. And then the Mason-Dixon poll they had in October, a couple weeks before the election, up by 9. And then what he actually won by, there you'll see the final results, and he won by almost 20%. So a good 10 points more than what the latest poll had shown. All right, and I'm just going to check in with my comments here and see if people are seeing that information. It looks like, yeah, sometimes we'll get in the comments, people will be like, oh, you can't see it, it's too small. So it definitely is more than he was supposed to win by, and I could see where that would make you feel uncomfortable or concerned. And then I know there was also another, I didn't pull this one up, but I heard that the 548 had predicted a whole series of wins for in the House. There were a whole slate of Democratic candidates that 548 was predicting to be ahead, and all of those lost. Actually, the Republicans won their full slate in the House. Is that correct?
Correct. Oh, sorry. Are you talking in Kentucky or in the U.S.? Because in the U.S. Congress, all the incumbent Republicans, not a single one lost their seat.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, in the U.S. House, there was a whole series of contested races that 548, which is, you know, a website that has made mistakes, and they make mistakes all the time, but they had been predicting many of those Democrats were ahead in their predictions, and they all wound up losing, and the Republicans won in all of those House races, correct?
Correct. And I'm not trying to say, all it did was raise some red flags for me. My concern became that the down ballot races were just not kind of falling into place. You know, you expect some surprises, but there were a lot of surprises. Lindsey Graham was a surprise, Joni Ernst. So Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, Joni Ernst, John Cornyn, those were all kind of surprising in terms of, what I thought were going to be tight races.
Right.
And we were going to be seeing a point or two just coming in a different way.
Okay,
So,
and let me just jump in here. I want to just tell people sort of broad overview where we're going to go with this program, because this program is not about challenging the elections. The elections are done. This program is about what we do with our concern. Like, do we have concerns? Are they legitimate? And what do we do with our concerns? So we're going to talk with Allison, and then I'm also going to show you how to do public records requests, how to actually look at election results, how to compare them. I went ahead and I just, as due diligence, checked the numbers that she put up in her Twitter thread. They were all correct. And I'm going to walk you through that, how you might check if you're curious about an article or something like that. So this is a good time, I think, to bring Benny in. And let's get us into the formation that we like and get our guest in the hot seat. Or we should just say hi to Benny. How you doing, Benny?
Hi, everybody. Unlike the internet, traffic is different from regular traffic. So sorry I'm late.
All right, great to have you here. We're glad that you made it.
Hey, Allison.
Hi, Benny. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
So I want to pop up the information that she sent me in regard to like how much traffic she actually got from this thread. It was kind of mind-boggling. So let me just have this up here. It's a PNG, and because people were obviously having the same concerns that you were having, or you wouldn't have had this kind of response. So you can see here, folks, in this impressions, she got 8 million impressions. Impressions is just how many feeds your Twitter thread shows up in, and then total engagements. This was over 1.5 million people actually engaged with this tweet. And so obviously you struck a nerve. Some of it I am going to say was negative, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the pushback that you got, because some of it's very, some of it's really legitimate. So when you started looking, how did you wind up focusing on Kentucky?
Okay, so where I started, like I mentioned, was with the Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina race. But I kept getting drawn back to Kentucky. And one of the things that I did was I created spreadsheets where I just started inputting the data that I was finding. One of the things was that the Kentucky, at first I was doing it from the New York Times, and then the Kentucky State Board of Elections was giving me a lot of information there too. So I started feeding that into my own homegrown spreadsheets. And really, when I started to look at, one of the things that came across was where Mitch McConnell was having significant results. And what I started to do is I looked at, for example, quite honestly, I started with registered voters to say, okay, this is how many registered Republicans there are, yet he's getting maybe twice or 3 times the amount of votes. And that kind of drew me back in. I actually put up.
Let me just ask you, I'm just jump in here, because you said you were really starting in South Carolina with Lindsey Graham, and then how did you wind up in Kentucky? Because you made that leap.
Right. I'm sorry, I made that leap. So when I actually had both spreadsheets open and was kind of working on 2 of them consecutively. But when I actually sorted, one of the things that I was able to do is that South Carolina is unique to Kentucky in that South Carolina uses ES&S machines across the whole entire state. In Kentucky, only about 20% of the counties are using ES&S machines. So what I started to see was a pattern in Kentucky, because I was seeing huge voluminous results that were going Mitch McConnell's way, that what I started to realize was that there was a correlation that they were happening on ES&S machines. So counties without ES&S machines it looked like there were some standard results. The ES&S machines were popping out. And that was when I realized that I could actually compare, okay, I'm starting to see some patterns here. Whereas in South Carolina, it's much harder because everything was kind of consistent. The counties looked consistent. But like I did it.
And that's because they're using the same, possibly that's because they're using the same machines all the way across the state. Maybe all the results are off, but if so, they're all in South Carolina.
They were consistently off all across the board. But I was seeing that when I did, so I actually sorted my results for Kentucky, for example, and, you know, I looked at the percentage first of Republican votes that Mitch had gotten. And so in the top county, Breathitt County, he got 233% more votes than there were registered Republicans. And when I did that list, the ones that popped out, they were pretty much then sorting, I noticed, by counties that had ES&S machines. It wasn't completely consistent, but in general, where there were ES&S machines, I was seeing the greatest amount of votes that he was getting.
And then let's just make sure, I want to clarify and bring the audience along. So not everybody knows the vendors, although we talk about vendors a fair amount on this show. So there are really two main vendors in the United States. There's ES&S, which is the vendor that Allison's talking about, and their main competition, Dominion. There are two smaller vendors, Hart Intercivic, Dominion, and actually also Clear Ballot is another vendor that has some action. But between Dominion and ES&S, you have about 80% of the market right there. So, and ES&S has the largest market share. They are the biggest voting machine vendor in the country. And I want to say that you're not the first person to kind of like try to analyze results by voting machines. It's something that a statistician, Beth Clarkson, did in her research. She was researching Kansas, and she divided the election results in Kansas up by voting machines and tracked the election results through a particular filter that she was using. That particular study is called the cumulative vote study, and she tracked. It's a way of analyzing small precincts versus large precincts. A little bit in the weeds here, but basically she tracked how the results looked based on voting machines. So you're not the first person to do this. And Beth found some very interesting results. In Kansas, she found that the results did vary by voting machine, and different candidates were ahead by larger percentages now by voting machines. Now, one thing that we really have to be careful of is kind of when you're Monday morning quarterbacking and you're kind of doing statistical analysis, it's just analysis. There's nothing you can really prove from statistical analysis, and statisticians are the first ones to say that. Philip Stark will always say the only way to really know for sure is to count the ballots and to count them by hand in public. So what we're doing is we're just looking and we're asking questions. So, and I want to go ahead and pull up I want to pull up your Twitter thread. We did, just so people can see, and I'll go ahead and put this link into the chat for people. This is Allison's thread, or it's one of her threads. We should say one of Allison's threads. You did quite a few on this, I know.
Yeah, she went to town on this one.
I went to town. Well, the first one actually was very shortly after the election, and it was really kind of putting something out there to say, hey, look, this is what I'm seeing. And, you know, can I just get some confirmation from people? You know, what do people think? Which was actually a great exercise for me as well, because it helped me look at things differently too. So, yeah, if you wanted to, I don't know if you were putting something up.
I'm working on it.
Why
so there we go.
Oh, okay, you got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is her thread. And do you want to just read some of this for us, Allison?
Sure. Now, and actually on the first one, I would like to there's been a lot of comment on this, so I do want to comment on that as well. So what I started out with was on my continuing quest to understand how Mitch McConnell, who had an approval rating of 18%, managed to win re-election by 57%. And I dug even deeper and that follows on from my thread, which was done in November. This is now in December. The deeper I dig, the more I find the numbers out of Kentucky just hard to swallow. And so here's a follow-up. My previous thread noted how many Kentucky Dems voted Republican. Folks said, and this was actually one of my overwhelming responses, is this is just how Kentucky voters are. But that forced me to look differently. And if Kentucky voters typically cross party lines, I realized it also makes it very easy to disqualify any odd numbers by just using that caveat that this is how Kentucky voters are. So I then looked, and that's where I found that in Breathitt, Mitch got 234% more votes than they had registered Republicans. Amy McGrath, her votes were only represented 17% of registered Dems. And so I did get some pretty prominent Kentucky people saying, well, again, that's how Kentucky was. So I actually did some research and found that there were 2 counties who had never before voted for Mitch McConnell. And many people are familiar, he's got quite the career. So they've gone to the voting booths a number of times. They did not vote for Mitch McConnell. And in this particular election, not only was it the first time that Mitch McConnell won in these 2 counties, but he won 2-1. So
right, and let's jump in there and let's dissect that a little bit. And then Benny, you had a point that you wanted to make. Do you want to circle back?
I was late, but I don't know how. Me and Allison have actually talked personally about a lot of this, so I've heard a lot of the story, but I don't know if Allison kind of gave any history, because Allison, you weren't doing this at first. You weren't looking at elections at all. Like you were in a completely different industry. And right, but you are a person who can work a spreadsheet and put some data together, and this just underscores the point that when a citizen decides to look at it, if they got some skills, they can look at it in a way that's more granular than the other set of voters are hearing from. But the other important part about it is it highlights the need for having a paper trail or something that we can verify. None of her questions are bad questions. It's not her fault that we don't have answers. It is real good that she's raising it. And now this is my bailiwick, analysis and crunching numbers and stuff. So I have a field day with stuff like this, and she's just telling a story. And that doesn't mean her story is wrong. That just means the explanation isn't there, and she's asking the question. So when our viewers see this, don't look at these as bad questions. These are really good questions.
And then let's just, I want to walk you through, I went ahead and checked your research today, just doing due diligence, and the numbers did add up in terms of, the numbers checked out in terms of what you had put on your Twitter thread. So I think I can bring some of this up because it's a lot of different websites that I went to. But for starters, I went to I just looked up voter registration, and I downloaded, let me see if I have the vote stats. When you want to do this kind of research, people, basically the easiest thing to do is just start Googling a little bit. You're going to find most of the states have a website that has their voter registration data, and they'll have a separate website that has their election data. So I Googled the Kentucky voter registration data, and I downloaded the voter registration stats. They had them by the month. So I picked November of 2020. And let me just jump in here to my Kentucky counties folder. So this was voter stats from 2020. And so I can share this with you now. And anybody really with a computer can go ahead and do this sort of work. And we're really encouraging you to do it. That's what this is about. Allison and Benny and I cannot individually monitor all of our elections. Right. It's up to you to learn how to do this. And then we're all going to be doing this together. And we're trying to get you ready even now for the midterms that are going to be coming up in 2022. So let's all get ready together. So I think hopefully you should be seeing now the vote stats. Yeah. And again, it's a little bit small, but make your screen full screen and take some screenshots if you want. So what I'm showing you here are the voter registration stats. And I went ahead and highlighted it. She pulled up Breathitt. It has a high Democratic. Now, these are pretty small counties. And sometimes that is one thing to keep in mind. Small counties can have just kind of like weird statistical patterns because they're small. And so the numbers don't have a chance to even out. So a lot of times when you do statistical analysis, you want to look at the really big counties. For one thing, that's probably, if somebody's messing with things, where they're going to go. They're going to go to those big counties with a lot of election results. But she's quite right. In Breathitt, you've got the Democrats at over 9,000 and you've got the Republicans at around 1,500. In Elliott, again, much higher Democrats, 4,257, 4,257. Republicans were less than 1,000 there at 800 and, God, I can't even read that. That's so small. Just blowing that up a little bit for us. 896. And then I went down and looked at Wolf. And Wolf, again, much higher Democratic makeup, 4,534 Democrats to 952 Republicans. And I don't have to walk you through everything, but I did check her numbers. And let me see, for example, I went to Elliott County. Let me see if the screen's following me here. Great. Okay, good. It's following me through these. So then I pulled up the election results from 2020 in Elliott County. And sure enough, we could see that even though we saw that all three of these counties had much higher registered Democrats, Mitch McConnell more than doubled Amy McGrath's votes. Mitch McConnell being the Republican, Amy McGrath being the Democrat. There were more registered Democrats, but it was the Republican Mitch McConnell who won by more than 2-1. And one thing that caught my eye in all of these counties that I did notice, and they all had this same issue. For if you look at this breakdown in this little handwritten sheet here, the election day votes, Mitch McConnell won by a landslide. Same with the early voting by a landslide. Those are in-person voting. But the mail-in voting, Amy McGrath actually won, 343 to 232. And that was the same in all of the counties that I looked at that she called out. Here we have Breathitt County, and it was the same thing. Mitch won by a lot, even though it's my predominantly Democratic county. But in the absentee voting, Amy McGrath won. It was the same in Wolf. It was the absentee voting where McGrath won. Here, 367 to 214, McGrath won. Now, I will say that in most years, that would have made me highly suspicious because there really should be no reason why you should have a different percentage of voting in the mail-in voting and the machine voting. The mail-in voting is going to be on paper ballots. Those are mail-in paper ballots, whereas the in-person voting is often on machines. And in this case, I called today and 2 of the counties verified that they're on touchscreen machines. They weren't able to tell me which type of touchscreen machines, but I'll call back. But my point actually is in this particular election, we know the Democrats were voting primarily or much more heavily in mail-in voting, and the Republicans were very leery of the absentee mail-in voting, and they came in person. So although in most elections, I would have thought that was very strange, in this particular election, there's an explanation for it. And that's what we're doing. You know, when you go through and do this work and you find things that seem odd, you're looking for explanations. So go ahead and walk us through what happened next with your research, Allison.
Okay, so I very much I appreciate that Benny pointed out where I was coming from, because I was very much coming from a layman point of view. And so that actually made me super cautious. Okay, maybe I don't want to look at it just this way. Let me start to look at the numbers in different ways. So I did I know what they say about assumptions, but, you know, so for example, I made some assumptions. Okay, well, looking at the Trump voter, I'm guessing that somebody who's voting for Trump is going to go for Mitch. Let me just look at those numbers. So I'm literally just throwing things out there and then looking at whether the numbers are a surprise or not. And the thing is I was seeing a lot of surprises. So for example, I was really quite surprised that when I looked at Trump's number, at Joe Biden's numbers and Amy McGrath's numbers, I just assumed that if you were voting for Amy McGrath, they were voting for Joe Biden. But I found about 40,000 people more had voted for Amy McGrath than for Joe Biden. And
she's a loser.
So then I kind of said, okay, well, so does this mean that there are people who are going to the voting booth and voting for Trump and voting for the woman Democratic senator? And I would look at those numbers and say, okay, well, it must be that there's an undercount. You know, not everybody who voted for president voted for the senator. That would explain it, but no. The numbers at the time, it was literally 550 votes difference in terms of the Senate race and the presidential race, which means that just about everybody other than 550 people voted for both Senate and the presidential race.
Is that statewide? Was that?
That was statewide.
Statewide, there was that small of a difference?
That was really surprising to me too. So I said, okay, is this normal? And I went and I started to look at how many people per state, for example, would vote in, different, in Kentucky. I would just randomly go, okay, Arkansas, Mississippi, Colorado. So I looked for states that had similar populations, and Colorado definitely has a larger population, but with 3 million votes for president in Colorado, you still had 21,293 people who didn't vote in the Senate race. Mm-hmm. So we went from 550 to 21,293.
So what we're saying there is that when you looked at Kentucky, which was somewhat comparable size in terms of the number of voters as Colorado, there was much smaller undervote. Almost everybody voted for Senate who voted for president. It was around 500. When you went to a state that was about the same size, Colorado, it went to 21,000, much larger number of people who didn't vote in the Senate race, in a down ballot race. And that's interesting because normally we look at a large undervote as suspicious, but what you're saying in this case, the smaller undervote kind of made you suspicious because you were like, was it that many people who voted in the Senate race? And I'm just going to take a comment here. I love it when people put comments up, and it's going to cover your face for a minute there, Allison. But okay. Sharon is actually one of our data people, and she says, the point about who voted absentee isn't convincing there because the number of absentee voters overall was small, while there were many more in-person votes. So plenty of Dems voted in person. So what you're saying there, Sharon, is that we should have seen a little bit closer proportion in terms of the absentee ballot and the in-person voting. And I think that's a pretty good point. So
I think that was part of the alarm for you too, Allison, right? Because if you look at the registration, if we had more data, we could actually compare the registration history and see, well, these were Democrats. Even though the lines were close, you can still see that it could have been 70-30 Democrat to Republicans voting.
And right. I don't want to take everybody through all the research. I did also go back and check in Elliott and Wolfe County, the 2014 and the 2008 races. And as you said, Mitch did not win in those years. He lost in those counties, those highly Democratic counties. This is the first time that he had won there, and he did win by a lot. Now, you got a lot of pushback on Twitter, and I'm just going to read people some of the pushback because it's really important to know there were a lot of people who weighed in and said this analysis that you did wasn't working for them. And so I think, let me see if I have here I copied some of the tweets because there was just so many of them. And I just wanted them all in one document. Let's see. Sorry, I did so much research this afternoon. There's just like opened up a lot of different documents. So I think maybe I put them in here. Yeah, okay. Let me try to share this. And I think the most plausible explanation came from Joe Girth, who was somebody who I think is a journalist there in Kentucky. And let me just share some of his comments, because I think they were the ones that were the most, they made the most sense. So what Joe was saying was Elliott County had voted for Democrats in every presidential race in its history until 2016, when it voted Trump. So he's saying here that there was a shift. This was a Democratic county that in 2016 all of a sudden started voting for Trump. That largely came about because of Republican claims of a Democratic war on coal, and because of Clinton's statement in Ohio about putting a lot of mines out of business. That part of, and this is, and I think you're able to see my document here. So this is all just things I copied from Twitter. You can go on Twitter, and I think I can put some of these links to Joe's. Yeah, I think I can put some of these into the chat. So people are welcome to go and do this research. And I see Michael Blair has joined us. Michael Blair is somebody who, I'm going to say that Allison described you, Michael, as a bit of a stalker. So just want to beware. You're definitely putting out interesting information. I was happy that you provided me with the information, but I just do want you to be cautious about how much you're following Allison around the internet. So this was Joe.
Watch out, Michael. Watch out.
This is Joe Burr's tweet that was a pushback on Allison's research, and he's making some really good points here. And again, this is the type of thing that you really want. You want to look, you'll have your questions, and then really look at what are people saying about the questions. So what Joe is saying here is that there was a reason for this, because these Democratic voters started voting Republican after 2016. It would have been after the last time Mitch was up for election in 2014. They started voting more Republican. Yeah. And he says that part of the state is scared to death of the future. The coal industry has been declining for years under both Democratic and Republican leadership, but the Republicans have done a good job of shifting blame to the Dems. So basically he's saying, it's been happening over time, and this was just a reflection of that. And do you want to respond to that, Allison?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I want to say is that when I saw, first of all, I will readily admit that I could not keep up with all of the feedback, and I could still go back today and find some new things that I hadn't responded to. But a lot of times when I would see something like that pushing back, it actually sent me back to my research, and I started looking at the numbers in different ways. So, for example, there were a couple of things that popped out. Again, looking at the idea that, okay, well, Amy McGrath was losing to Mitch McConnell, but she still actually had more votes than Joe Biden was getting, was an interesting, portion of that. The other thing is the 2019 gubernatorial.
I guess I have to say I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just don't understand that. If Amy McGrath was getting more votes than Joe Biden, but it still wasn't enough for her to beat Mitch McConnell, I don't quite understand how any of that has an internal logic. It all just seems confusing to me.
Well, that would mean that they're not too afraid of coal country, right? Why would they be afraid of the senator but not afraid of the president? So
they're going and they're voting for a Democrat in the senatorial race, in those cases. But I also found it, and I will very much.
It wouldn't have given Mitch more votes. That wouldn't explain a high vote for Mitch if you had people voting for Amy and for Trump.
Right. That just makes it an outlier if you're doing an objective analysis, right? There's not a whole lot of domain references to the local way politics work. Me and Allison went around the horn, and I asked her a bunch of different questions. Like, they just say, well, it's a Kentucky Democrat. I mean, it's a Kentucky. What is it? What they say? Something that's just a Kentucky voter. There's an expression that's in Kentucky that says they just vote Kentucky. So, you got little places where Democrats could be favorable to Republicans because it's a like tribal knowledge. But she's not doing that in her analysis. She's trying to make some correlation and causation and just let the numbers speak for themselves.
And then Michael's here pointing out that McGrath actually encouraged people to vote for her and Trump. So that's, you know, something to take in mind. That would explain some of this. So I think I don't want to, and we want to get to some of your other research, which is also quite interesting. So I don't want to spend the whole time on this, but I think we've had a good discussion of it. And what I do, I want to just bring home the point that there are things that you can do besides just wonder about this. And this is really, this is really at the center of what I want you to take away from this forum that we're having. And that is, what is your next step? You have questions. You are the public. You have the right to have public oversight. The next step is to do a public records request for documents from the election. And I went ahead and went today and looked at Kentucky open records law. Public records requests are something that we did a whole forum on. So if you're not quite sure what it is, go back and look through our forums. Look for the one about public records requests. And I don't know what happened to Benny, but I'm going to go ahead and pop him off because we've lost him for a minute there. Public records requests are something that we're doing on a regular basis here at Smart Elections. And I want to just, Allison, I'm going to pop you off here and I'm going to talk to people about public records requests, and then we're going to do a break to talk to people about how to get involved with us. And then we'll have you back after the break to talk about some of your other really interesting research about how they vote in Canada, and then also about ownership of the voting machines, who those voting machines are owned by, and who owns the voting machines. And that's another article that you wrote. So it's great to have you here with us. And I think you're bringing up a lot of really interesting questions, and we're very grateful to you for being here with us.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so let's talk briefly about public records requests. What is it? Sometimes acronym of PRR, or also called FOIL, which is for the Freedom of Information Law, or FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. These are all basically the same thing. And what it means is that you, the public, have the right to public records. And those public records can vary in terms of what you're allowed to look at. So one thing that I did today was I went and I looked at the Kentucky public records law. And again, the way to do this when you're researching this stuff is really just start Googling. You can just Google public records requests Kentucky, or whatever your state is. If you're in California, public records requests California, public records requests Tennessee, where Benny is, and or as I said, FOIA or FOIL. And so I went ahead and did that. And what I came up with was this document, which I am also going to put into the chat. This is the public records request guidelines in Kentucky. And I'm going to share that with you. And I'm just going to share my screen. And great, here we go. So I went and I wanted to see if there's anything in here that says that ballots or election records are exempt from public inspection. And I actually went through this whole thing. This is in Kentucky, and it talks about personal information, information that's confidential, information that has to do with businesses, estate appraisals, all kinds of things that is not available for public records, records having historic, literary, artistic, or commemorative value, if the person has requested that, like, you know, from a museum, things like that. But I went through all of these, and from what I could tell, there is no prohibition there on ballots or election information. And that's very important, because what we're going to do next is write a letter to these 3 counties, and we want to ask them for copies of their ballots. Now, for the most part, these probably are not going to be hand-marked paper ballots, because I called them and 2 out of 3 of them said they're on touchscreen voting machines. Now, that's already a problem, because we know, if you've been watching this forum, that touchscreen ballots are more easily manipulated. We don't have the chance, as we have with hand-marked paper ballots, for the voter to be checking as they're filling in that they're doing it correctly. On a computer, the computer can change it, and often people don't notice. So it's not as trustworthy to do a public records request for computer-generated ballots, but it still might be interesting for us. And so we can do that. And I want to just show you one example of what we are doing. here at Smart Elections, and one reason why it's really good for you to support us, I'm going to talk to you in a minute about donating to our organization. One of the things that we're doing is public records requests. And why is it important? It's important for public oversight. If we don't ask these questions and we don't check on election results, then we'll never know if the results are right or not, and we will just continue to have these questions. But if we start to ask questions and have public oversight over many, many of our elections in every state, and we really want you to do this wherever you're living, we want you to have public oversight over your elections, then it becomes much harder to play with the results or to have foul play because people are watching. So I want to show you on Count the Vote, which was our public oversight project. We put up a lot of the data that we found in the Georgia election. And so I want to show you that. Here's our website, and this is countthevote.info. And I'll put that into the chat. It's a really interesting website. I encourage you to go there and take a look at all the work we've done. We don't have all of our work up yet, but we have much of it. A lot of it is up. And so I'll just show you like this. If you click on these, you're going to get to a diagram like this that shows you what anomalies we found, for example, in Georgia. And this was in Cobb County in the Bryant 02 precinct. We found poll tapes that had, for example, Donald Trump had 40 votes on the poll tape, but he was reported when the election results were printed to have 73 votes. And Biden had 330 votes on the poll tape, but when the results were printed, he had 520. So the results don't match the poll tape. Excuse me. And so we did a public records request. Oh, I see this isn't, it's not coming along with me. Okay, I have to show you each screen individually. It's a bit of a drag. I'm going to show you the entire screen, and I'm worried to do it that way. Okay, so here's our transparency reporting. Is that going to show it to you? Yes. Okay, that's going to show you. And we've showed this work previously. So this is where we had the poll tape with results, and then they don't match the published results. And so we're writing public records requests now, and here's the letter that, do I have the letter? Yeah. So here's the letter that we've written to Cobb County. We have a wonderful volunteer, Lon Devitt, who's doing this with us, and he writes a lot of our letters. See if that pulls that up. Yeah, okay, so here's our letter, and this is to the Cobb County clerk. And what we said here is, Ms. Evelier, following up on our telephone call, we cite the statute, which is the Public Records Request Statute. We're requesting copies of all Election Day poll tapes, early voting results tapes, mail-in voting results tapes, and provisional ballots for the following Cobb County precincts. And these are the precincts where we had results that we were concerned about. And now I'm just going to, and so we're sending these letters out. We've actually already sent all these, and we've gotten responses back from the counties. And we're going to be getting these poll tapes from them, hopefully. So, Benny, you were one of the first people to try to teach us how to do this. And do you want to just talk a little bit about why this is important?
Yeah, absolutely. When you consider that asking a question about the returns is an entirely public and justifiable request. That's what I did as a citizen when people didn't trust outcomes here in Shelby County, just as a regular citizen. Even though I'm a software developer, this is before I became an election commissioner. I was just like Allison. I was in a completely different career field, got a little expertise in computers, and I was like, well, they put some totals out in the windows. Let's make sure that when they go to the computer that they're the same, and they weren't. And it turned out to be a stinking problem here. So it is entirely realistic for you to check for the totals to make sure that they tie up. You know, once the aggregator is totaling everything up, it should still be the same as what the initial cash register put out on the receipt. So we get a receipt for nearly everything else. I wish my bank account would give me an extra comma, but those things just don't happen. Debo, if you listen, give me an extra comma. But those things just don't happen in in things that are high stakes. And with elections, those are high stakes. So, and everybody's incredulous of it now. 2022 is happening. So we all need to be verifying everything.
Right. And just to be clear, there's different things that we're looking at. So in that, like that case in Georgia, we were looking at the poll tapes, which are a little receipt that the computer prints out of all of the voting results at the end of the night. You're never going to get a receipt that you take home with you of how you voted.
Right.
It's not allowed because you can be coerced that way, or your vote can be purchased. But the poll tape at the end of the night, when all those votes are tallied up, we can get copies of those. That's what we're requesting in Georgia. In Kentucky, what we may request, we might request the poll tapes, but I think what's going to be more interesting is if we actually try to get the digital ballot images or actual just Xerox copies of the paper ballots, actually have them, run off copies for us, or scan them. We can get digital copies, and we can take a look and see if those votes add up. And that's what I hope that we're going to do. Now, I am going to just do some plugging here for fundraising.
Plug it in.
And our website is smartelections.us. One of the reasons why you want to fund us is because we need money to do this. So those public records requests that we put in, they are not free. So
Right.
Cobb County came back with a fairly reasonable request. Fulton County asked us for $500 in order to give us their poll tapes. And it does add up. And so we do very much need you to make donations to us. And we have a donations page on our website. If you just go to smartelections.us/donate, then you can make a tax-deductible donation there. That's the website. And we do have not-for-profit status through our fiscal sponsor. And so all of the donations are tax-deductible. We do say, please give as much as you can. We are definitely looking for donors right now. We do not have enough to pay our bills for this year. So we really can use whatever help you can give us. If you can make a monthly donation and become a monthly contributor, that's really helpful too. And then we also would love it if you would follow us on Twitter. We are at @smart_elections, and we are also on Facebook, and we would love it if you would like us on Facebook. You can follow us here on our YouTube channel. We're also on Instagram and TikTok, and we have the website that I showed you about, countthevote.info. That's where we have a lot of our data and statistical work going. So that's a little bit of a roundup. And one thing I realized we haven't been doing is encouraging people to sign up for the email list. So if you go to smartelections.us, then there's a thing right there toward the top, and you can get on our email list and get more information about upcoming events. Please make sure to sign up for our next forum, which is going to be 2 weeks from today. So I think that's May 4th. When you're done with this forum here, just go right to the website and sign up for the next forum. And you can also, if you are in New York, we have special Friday meetings working on the elections here in New York. I live in New York, and we are working on legislation here to fight hybrid voting machines. And we would love it if you would come and join those meetings every noon in New York. We had an amazing call rally, Benny. Ask us how many calls people made.
How many calls did people make?
We had over 100 people call our legislature, both the Assembly and the Senate. The staff there said they were inundated with calls. That was at our call rally on Monday. It was very successful.
You did not make any friends in the legislature.
I don't know what you're talking about. They love us.
Yeah.
They are going to pass our bills, and then
Please do your job up there for us.
they are going to pass our bill. We're really excited about that. So we just have a few minutes left. I think, is there anything that I've forgotten? I did a good, thorough run through there.
Yeah, just past episodes. There was an enormously talented Pulitzer public records person. So there is an episode where you can definitely learn about the public records request.
Yeah, if you go back through we have a playlist of all of the past forums, and we had a guest who talked about public records requests. He's not a Pulitzer Prize winner, but
that was the next week.
I think maybe he'd won an Emmy.
Emmy, right. It's a big time guy.
We've had some really, really good people on the
We
show.
have a lot of them here.
And and also if you want to reach us personally, contact@smartelections.us. We love it when you send us feedback, whether you love the forum or had problems and want, have suggestions. We love to hear from you at our website there. And Betty and I both have our Twitter tags up. So we just have a few minutes left. Let's make sure to get some questions in, and let's bring our guest back and talk about some of her other work. So I really want to make sure that we get to the info about the Canadian voting system. That was another article that you did. Tell us about what you found about the Canadian voting system.
Yeah, I mean, that was fascinating because I kind of looked at it that we're in this bubble over here, and I said, how are other people conducting their elections? And I actually wrote down the statistic real quick, but 209 of 227 countries use paper ballots. So we're an outlier, and especially amongst our allies, we're the only ones who are not using a paper ballot system. So I actually kind of did a deep dive into, I've been working very closely with David K. Johnston, and his daughter lives in Canada, and they had discussions and said, this isn't an issue in Canada. And he said, let's look into this. And so we went and delved into Canada, and they have the system where they go and you go behind, they have, first of all, a federal paper ballot system that was decided by the federal government after conducting a survey to say, not a survey, I'm sorry, they did a deep dive to determine, a study to determine whether they would take on electronic voting machines. And they decided, no, it's too problematic. We're going to stick with paper. And
let me just clarify, because you said you had the statistic of the number of countries that are using paper ballots versus electronic systems. Now, the United States, many of the states now are primarily on paper ballots. So, but I think those paper ballots sometimes are generated by computers.
Hand-marked paper ballots.
So when you're saying that the study that the numbers that you were citing there of the 200 of about 227 counties, they're using countries, they're using hand-marked paper ballots. And then are they hand counting those also?
In Canada, they were. Literally, after the polls close in Canada, they lock the doors. They have a strict procedure. There are different people. There are rules in terms of a chain of custody, and they hand count per county. So, when you look at it.
So that's in the location. They count
in the location.
Wow.
And is it, are they videotaping it? Is it open for people to watch? How do people observe and have oversight?
I would have to check on that. I believe it was videotaped, but I don't believe it was public. But I do believe that it was videotaped, and I'd have to go back and check on that. But yeah, they have almost like a manual that the federal government is saying, this is how you have to conduct the elections. This is the process. And, confidence in Canada in their election results was up to 86%. People feel better knowing there's a structure and an oversight, and that they can actually know who's been counting them. It's very much taken out of any partisan equations as well. It's very independent.
Oh, so
I think Canada toyed around with some internet voting at one point, and they had a whole investigation. I had some conversations with the RCMP last year about that.
Yeah, 2016 to 2017, they did a full-on study. So they do use electronic voting in some local elections, but it's not allowed on a federal level.
And let me just ask you, because we're running out of time here, what is their solution for voters with disabilities? How are those voters, how are those voters' needs met?
I'll have to check into that and let you know.
Okay, we'll report back on that then, because that is definitely something that is really a big priority for us here at Smart Elections. We're really working with voters with disabilities and making sure that they are not disenfranchised. And so we'd be very interested to know, what's going on there in countries that are marking their ballots by hand, counting by hand. How are voters with disabilities needs being met?
I'd love to look into that. So I'll definitely get back to you on that one.
Yeah, super. And then we just have 1 minute here before we close out. So are there any sort of final thoughts that you want to leave people with?
Look, I mean, I think Benny was, first of all, we've had great conversations and I've really appreciated his feedback, but it's really just about asking the questions. It's not about putting, we actually are looking at the data, or I am looking at the data in very different ways, asking questions. And then my kind of shift is now to say, okay, why is it so difficult to get the attention of people and to have processes to verify the information? I really want to see that we can go into it where people not only can ask questions, but feel comfortable and confident about how they are getting answers, which is currently missing.
Right. I mean, one of my questions immediately to those 3 counties, I want to know, did they do an audit of any type? And I did call all of them today. The clerks were not able to speak with me. I don't know if it's because they were there and they didn't want to speak with me. One of the women did hang up on me in one of the counties. So it is hard sometimes to get answers from these counties, but this is what public oversight is about, is demanding these answers. So
yeah, I haven't made many friends in Kentucky either.
Yeah, another point you was making, Allison, is that they elected a Democrat governor in 2019. So they weren't afraid of the Democratic Party in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things that I wanted to just say too. I understand when people say, coal country and everything, but the fact that they elected a Democratic governor in 2019 also didn't necessarily jive with me. But there were a lot of different factors. I looked at this from a bunch of different angles. We didn't even get into all of it. My hope is not that my investigation is the end all. It's that it's the kickoff point. And my hope was that, I mean, Attorney General Garland has a lot on his plate, but one of the hopes that I would have is that maybe he can look into local election results, have the DOJ or an independent body be looking at these types of things, who have the ability to get more information than I can.
Right, or we'd like to just do some public records requests to start with.
Yes.
And that might be a little simpler. And if people do want to support us financially in doing those public records requests, you could always send a donation and send us an email that says that donation was specifically for public records requests in Kentucky, and then we'll know to greenlight that money in that direction. So I thank you so much for being here, Allison. It's such a pleasure to have you here, and good luck with all your research.
We'll have to get you back to unpack some of it.
We had a request in the chat for the study that showed the other countries that are counting their ballots by hand.
I did have that jotted down somewhere. I can look and see if I can post it in the comments after this or get it to you, but I think it was the I won't go off of memory, but
okay, yeah. So go ahead and email it to me, and we'll try to send it out in the next newsletter blast, and make sure that people get that information. So thank you again for joining us. It's really great to have you here.
Well, and sorry, I will just say that I did do an article on Canada voting in DC Report that does cite that study as well. So I'll pull it up, but you can also go to DC Report and pull up under my name, and you'll find it in one of those articles too.
I think I have all your article links. So let me just get them to people right now so that we can get that information. So tell us the different articles that you did, and I'll put these links into the chat.
Sure. There's quite a few of them.
Well, I know we have the one on the, let's start with we did the one on Canada voting system. So I have this right here, and there were a couple other links that you sent me with that, and maybe some of those studies are there. So this is the Canadian voting system. We'll put that in the chat. Canadian voting system. This is Allison's article.
And that will have that link, but I'll send it out again as well.
Okay, and then was that also, I have a study that you sent me from the Secure Our Vote website. Was it that one?
No, it was a different one.
Different one. Okay, so, and then you also did an article that we just didn't have time to talk about, but I encourage people to read about who owns the voting machines.
That was a really good one.
think you sent me the link to that one also.
Is that the same one where you had a few bully vendors in there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
no,
okay.
actually, that was a different one with the bully
Yeah,
vendors.
yeah. She got another one with bully vendors where.
Yeah, if you actually go
you.
under DC Report in the search bar and search under Allison Green, it will also pull up my articles. It's also the pinned tweet in my Twitter account as well. Can show
And you
you all.
text me one the other week with Marco Rubio or something, right?
Yes, I took a deep dive into the Senate intelligence report.
Right, yeah. That was a really good one too.
It seems like it's off of elections, but it's very much on topic as well. So.
Okay, well, we got 2 links in the chat. We got the Canadian article and the Kentucky article, and then I'm sure they can find your other articles from there. So support our independent journalists and be sure and read her work. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Okay, take care. Bye. Okay, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, she's got a lot of information.
Yeah, definitely. I like her approach. I like it's just like open-ended. Let's see where the data takes us, and let's.
And she be digging.
Courageous and ask those questions and not be shy. It's one thing, you know, we want to be responsible and we want to make sure that we're not asking irresponsible questions, but we also don't want to be stifled, and we want to make sure that we are providing intelligent oversight of our elections and making sure that they're accurate. So I really enjoyed hearing what she had to say there.
Awesome.
So we just have to wrap up.
Okay. I got a riddle in my Twitter. It's a picture. It's 3 words. Somebody tweet me if they can figure it out.
What is it?
It's a picture. It's on my header from my Twitter. It's 3 words.
Are you going to show us?
No, we had to go to my Twitter page. Okay. Just tweet. Just if you see if you can make it out, tweet it to me.
All right. There's a riddle from Benny, and then you know where to find us. We are at smartelections.us, and we didn't introduce Benny. We just brought him on really fast. But Benny Smith is an election commissioner from Tennessee.
Yep. And also, a data junkie.
Yeah, big time. And an advisor to us here at Smart Elections. So thanks so much for being here. Be sure and sign up for our next forum. We will have another information packed forum for you, and be sure and sign up on our mailing list at the website, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Thanks so much, everybody.
Good night, everybody.